Welcome back to another episode of Tales from the Trenches, some of our peer group stories and things that we've learned and seen in the peer group. Sometimes we bring stories from members from the week, sometimes we bring stories from our past, and sometimes we mix it up with a little bit of everything. So today we're talking about some of those things that you can only get when you're in person, right? That's a large portion of what we run into in peer groups is that a fair amount of members are like, do I really need to come to that thing in person? Take 2 days or 3 days away from the office is kind of a lot. And the answer to the question is, yeah, you should come, right? That the whole idea is to really kind of build your business and spend some time working on the business versus in the business. Being in these peer groups requires you to work on the business. It also gives you all kinds of additional opportunities for learning some stuff that you wouldn't have learned by just being on a Zoom or a Teams call. So today we're going to talk about a couple different stories from our own past as it relates to being in person and why that's so important. So Natalie, thanks for hopping on the podcast with me again today. Why don't you kick us off with a story or two of your past, because I know that we have a shared history with peer groups. But tell us a little bit about some of the things that you found beneficial to kind of being in person and seeing things from a different viewpoint than you would have had it just been through a call.
Yeah, so part of being in person is less distraction, right? You're not looking at your computer the whole day. You're not getting those Teams messages every 5 seconds. And when you're doing a virtual meeting or something to that nature, you're always distracted. And part of just being in person is really immersing yourself into the peer group and just being able to have those conversations. And I've been in peer groups for quite a while, and I would rather go in person every time, even that first time when I was terrified to travel, right? Mm-hmm. And part of what you really gain from that is it's not just the conversations in the rooms that you're having. It's, you get a little bit into what have you done for pricing or what have you done for, ticket flow or dispatch or stuff of that nature. And you might get, 20 minutes into the topic. But a lot of it is that after hours sitting down, it doesn't have to be at the bar, but sitting at the bar or finding a table and really getting into the nitty gritty of what the other person's doing, mm-hmm. and really sharing experiences and stories. And not only does it help you in your job, you're also building that bond with somebody else that's in the same type of position as you. Yep. And sometimes it's not even that. Sometimes maybe your peer group has been talking about, and for example, I was, in the service manager peer group. Maybe you're sharing, your struggles of coaching up or even coaching your employees. Well, then afterwards you can really get into how have you actually dealt with this? And that was probably more beneficial to me than 50% of the meeting because you get into the nitty gritty. And you get to see different perspectives.
Totally. Yeah, I can remember, sitting, we were at a restaurant, I think it was called Portillo's, not that part's important, but we were sitting down eating hot dogs and brats and talking about revamping service departments. And we grabbed some napkins and we were drawing on the napkins, trying to figure out a way to kind of handle some of that kind of stuff. And it was really just allowed us to dive deeply into that conversation, much to your point of, hey, this gives us the opportunity to do some of those things. And it was people from my own group from back in the day, but it was people I hadn't sat by. And we talked, I don't know, for probably an hour on this one topic. And half the table was really into the conversation. We're spitballing things back and forth. And that's stuff that you just can't duplicate via Teams or Zoom or any of the virtual platforms because it just doesn't offer that. Natalie, do you have any specific stories or specific things that you remember kind of running into yourself?
Yeah, so that's kind of how I did my dispatch. Prior to starting any coaching or anything like that, I didn't have a dispatcher. I needed a dispatch process, hotel paper, that you get in your room and you're sitting down at the bar making notes, talking to all the different service managers and even owners at that point, really, because you're intermingling. You're getting to see all the sides of it. And going back and you have a stack of papers and sitting at the airport in Chicago, yep. On the floor when my flight's delayed with all my papers spread across the floor of the airport and me trying to interchange them to make sure everything was in order to build my first dispatch process. Because I went there not knowing anything about dispatch. Like, okay, yes, I know what dispatch is in theory, but
Right.
not like the pieces that are in it. And I probably had an entire stack of hotel papers, Hilton paper, sitting on the floor of the airport where everybody's looking at me, spread out, interchanging it back and forth. And yep, always the notepad, always colored pens and all the different stuff. And it really came from the conversations we had at the bar the night before of how do we, it's good in theory to talk about, oh, the dispatch process, so easy, but then really taking all those notes and saying, okay, this is how it pieces together. And I probably wouldn't have been able to get that done at that time in my career without the peer group, without going in person and really having those conversations and taking notes. And you just don't get that virtually.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I can remember, a number of times being in. We happened to go to Chicago a lot, so
Mm-hmm.
we were in one of the Chicago hotels, and I actually needed to do some other stuff. It was like, but it was allowed me to like completely focus on my job versus
Yeah.
versus like dealing with all of the client issues of the day or whatever else was going on. And I went down to the front desk. This was probably, I don't know, about 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and I said, "Hey, do you happen to have any post-it notes?" And they said, "Well, sure." So they gave me a thing of post-its, and I went back up to my room, and I mean, I probably look like one of those people on one of those murder, those true crime podcasts where they're post-it notes everywhere and like strings here. I didn't have any strings, but it was post-it note city all over the wall, and it really allowed me to like spend some time to visualize kind of some of the stuff I needed to get done based on what we had been talking about that day and kind of aligning kind of all of the priorities and things that, hey, we can do this quarter, we can do this other thing next quarter. These other things would be cool to do, but maybe we'll do that sometime in the future. And it was just this mad list of post-it notes, and it was actually built a process as part of that, of the thing that now I basically do that every year, where I sit down with a bunch of post-it notes or maybe index cards depending on the thing, and then I write down all the things I want to get done, and or the things that I've committed to elsewhere, or all of the things, and I line them up by quarter, and I kind of work my way through it. Well, the peer groups were a great opportunity for me to do that because my brain was already in this work
Mm-hmm.
mode and thinking about the bigger picture of things, and it was really easy for me to sit down and like really crush through that. It's just like your dispatch process.
Yeah. So the first few times I used to fly back right after the peer groups were done, like, oh, we got to get to the airport. And after about the third or fourth meeting, I think it was, I'm already gone. So me rushing back is not going to benefit anyone. And you learn so much. It's almost information overload
Hmm.
when you're in person. And you have so many notes. And I would have pages of notes. And I'm a pen and pad, I like all the colored pens, all the different color coding. And uh, one of the other peer group members and I would sit at the bar. We decided we always were going to stay that extra night, and we would sit down at the pool, or we'd sit at the bar and we'd go over our notes and really talk about, was that the priority, or do we need to prioritize this? And not only that, it was giving us kind of a laid back working through everything between the two of us, or maybe there was a third person sometimes. But we were really just, spitballing like, hey, is this really the priority now? Is this leadership alignment? Are we working toward the right thing? And you get into so many topics during the actual peer groups and talking to vendors and talking to all of that, that sometimes you lose sight of, hey, let's put all the notes from the 2 days together.
Hmm.
And me rushing back, I would never have time to decompress, and then I would never have time to really align my thoughts. And once I started realizing like that extra few hours that night after, where you can still sit at the bar, um, many of notes on hotel napkins, bar
Hmm.
napkins, and really start making like a plan. And then that way, when you do get back, you're prepared to, whether you are the owner, and you're ready with your plan to send down to your team, or when you're part of leadership and you're going to be presenting to leadership like, hey, this is what I want to do. And having that time, that uninterrupted time to
Hmm.
really think through all the plans was, it was just really beneficial for me. And I don't think I would have been able to really come back and try to take the week where I'm trying to catch up from all that being gone without those few hours of just like decompression and let's think it through.
Yeah, come back with a plan and like have
Yeah.
everything ready to go and have your thoughts in order versus trying to get your thoughts in order while you're trying to now catch up on
Yeah.
all the stuff you missed, from the previous days or week or whatever, and having come back with like a, hey, okay, when I get back, these are the two or three things I want to do, and really probably should be like one or two, and
Yeah.
with maybe three or four things kind of later on down. Yeah, that was big for me too, right? And that's one of those things you don't really learn right away. That's a thing that you kind of figure out over time, and it allows you to come back to just a little bit less chaos,
Mm-hmm.
and it allows you to come back with some level of prioritization, because the last thing you want to do is come back and go, blah, here's a bunch of stuff, team, to we just need to work on all this stuff now. No, 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 no. Everyone has a day job. You can't just come back and just make everybody do all the things. Come back with like one thing. Hey, I think I learned something about this. I think we should lean into that. Your team's going to like that a whole lot more, and you're very likely going to get a whole lot more
Yeah.
traction and buy-in when you come back with a more cohesive thought.
Yeah, part of peer groups is, yes, learning how to do your job better, learning how to be a better owner or a better service manager or a better salesperson. That's part of it. That is a piece of it, and I would say it's a good piece of it. The other part is just building those relationships with other people. That's hard to do virtually. Everybody in the workforce has had that since COVID, knows how hard it was to shift to virtual and still have a cohesive, work balance with everyone in their team. But going in person, you're actually sitting there like learning about their lives. Learning, I've gone on vacation with a couple of peer group members, had a girls' weekend. We've sat and talked about their actual what's going on in their world, not just business, which is almost just as important as learning all of the facts. Lifelong friendships, right? That
Hmm.
you're building, that you don't do that virtually. The meeting's over, you're like, meeting's over, and you're done. But when you're in person, you get to sit there and really have a conversation. And that has been just so important to me over the years of meeting all the people and just really learning about them.
Yeah, you're building the friend groups, and they may
Yeah.
become lifelong friends, and so much of this business is all about building relationships, whether it's building relationships with your prospects and clients, but also your team and your staff. But the members in your peer group or peer groups is really important as well. If you keep everybody kind of at arm's length and you don't interact with them outside the meetings, and it's a thing you see them every once a month if it's a virtual meeting, or a few times a year in person. The goal though is really to kind of continue building relationships and being humans with each other. I think that's a big part of it. Some of the things that I like to chuckle and remember fondly, mostly because it wasn't me involved in them, but sometimes the members might go to a bar, or they might go out and they do some have some shenanigans after hours, and I always like to remember some of the fun ones from back, and back kind of early in my peer group days. And one time we got back on day two, and one of the members was like, yeah, we almost got in a fight last night, and we they were at some sort of Irish bar or something, and they were playing cornhole, where you throw the bean bags at those boards 15 feet away or whatever. And one of the guys got a little careless with the toss, and hit somebody else in the chest, and from a different group, and there had probably been a few adult beverages consumed by that at that point, and there was almost a little bit of a situation there. So I think some additional beverages were purchased for the other group, and then the group boogied on out of there. It made for some good stories the next morning for sure. Natalie, do you have any stories from your time frame?
Yeah, honestly, what I find is funny is and this is PAX 8 peer groups, right, as a facilitator, but when we were in San Diego, and of course San Diego got hit with the flooding right before
Hmm.
we get there, right, and it's still kind of flooding. We went out to eat, and we had all Ubered over there because it wasn't that far, but it was far enough that you needed to Uber.
Hmm.
And part of my peer group was left at the restaurant, and we're trying to get an Uber, and there's like three of us trying to get an Uber, and nobody's picking up the Uber. And then the last guy picks up the Uber, and we all get in the car, And he was like, "Well, if we don't hurry, you're not getting back to the hotel." They were actively closing the streets
Oh yeah,
as
I
our
remember
Uber
that.
driver was driving back to the hotel. And he's like, "Honestly, I wouldn't have picked you up, but my house is on the other side and I have to go over there." So we made it back to the hotel, but it was one of those things where you're like, "What do you mean we wouldn't make it back?" Like, he's like, "Yeah, they're actively closing it because it's starting to flood." And so that it was just one of those funny things of like, all of us will always remember that, like, hey, we could have not made it back.
Yep.
And it was fun time. We stayed at the restaurant a little bit longer, but it's one of those fun things that you remember. And everybody made it back, went to the bar, had a good time afterwards, and relaxed. But it was just funny that it was just that sheer, weird thing happening in San Diego.
Yeah, it's always an adventure, right? And you never know what's
Always.
going to happen when you go there, which is one of the reasons why we typically get there a little early. And we have, in all of our travel kit stuff, we bring first aid kits, and we've got Tums and Advil, and for all the reasons, right? Sometimes it's self inflicted, sometimes it's
Benadryl.
not, but we absolutely put some of those things to use from time to time.
Yeah. Other than, also tons of Benadryl
Yep,
in the kit. Always an adventure when I go.
yep.
So,
Yeah, our allergy friend here likes to get doused with things that don't necessarily work well with your system. Yeah, that's always an interesting thing too. The now the whole reason we do these podcasts, and one of the reasons that we're trying to continue to kind of have these conversations is one, because I think it's important that everybody gets to a peer group, right? We'd love to have you at a PAX 8 peer group, but if PAX 8 peer group isn't for you, and if you're not an MSP, right, there are peer groups for your
mhm.
industry, and being in a peer group will move your career, move your company, move life for you forward in so many good ways that while if you're unable to join a PAX 8 peer group, please join another peer group, because good things come from peer groups. Natalie, any final words for our friends out there in the MSP space?
Honestly, like Adam said, it doesn't matter what peer group you're in. There's always one for your industry. I've been in multiple peer groups, Vistage, industry, non-industry, Toastmasters, all of
Yep,
those different things. And I know Toastmasters is a little different, but you're still learning. And I wouldn't be here without peer groups.
me either.
I wouldn't be here. It wouldn't have happened. I wouldn't have made it through the first year of service management without a peer group. And part of the peer group is just you're not alone. You're having all the same problems as everybody else, but it gives you a family to go back to, or a friend group or circle of influence that you can go back to and you can trust and be open and vulnerable and still have everything intact, and you still can walk away knowing that you have somebody to call on. And so it, like Adam said, it doesn't matter what peer group you're in. Find one. We'd love to have obviously everybody in a PAX 8 peer group, but if that's not feasible at that time, find one that's local. Find any group that you can talk to your peers in, and you'll benefit.
Absolutely. So with that, I think it's time that we wrap up another Tales from the Trenches. Come back next week for some additional tales. Thanks for hanging out with us.
Bye, guys.